Thank you. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to look out and see some people that I already know, some old friends, and obviously some new friends. I was very much intrigued to learn from the bulletin that I have been promoted to professor. I look forward to finding out more about that. The title of my talk is actually Homelessness and Community, because that is my work. My work is creating space for hospitality in which people without homes can find warmth, food, rest, and welcome, and where neighbors can gather to break bread and spend time together. And as you heard, one place that I do that is at First Church in Cambridge, where I am the street outreach minister and the founding minister of the Friday Cafe, which is dear to my heart. It's a weekly gathering where housed and unhoused neighbors can be together in community each week. I'm also a minister of the Outdoor Church of Cambridge, and in fact, just here from our weekly 9 a.m. service in Porter Square, an outdoor service. Up until recently, I was a minister of Boston Warm, a drop-in center I helped found in response to the closing of the Long Island Bridge and the ensuing homeless emergency in Boston. Homeless ministry is full of improvisation. Boston Warm was total improvisation, but it worked, and it continues to go strong. And I have here one of my volunteers, the wonderful Peg, who spent many, many hours with us at Boston Warm. All of these ministries that I do I have a wonderful opportunity to participate, to make connections in the community, and I can tell you more about that later on. I brought a few flyers for anyone who might be interested. In fact, right now, Boston Warm for the summer months, June, July, and August, is actually just down the street in the basement of Old South Church, its original home. And you can connect with Boston Warm on Thursdays. My own start in homeless ministry goes back about 5 years when I learned about a program being run at the Episcopal Cathedral Church of St. Paul across from Park Street. The priest who had founded the program was looking for some help and wondered if I would be interested. I was, but I worried that I had no experience. Just come on Monday and try it out, the priest told me. If you don't love it, don't worry about it. It won't work. It's not for everyone. If you don't love it, don't worry about it, she said. Just come and see. Come and see. So, of course, I'm standing in the Christian tradition. That's where I come from. I'm that dread entity, a Christian minister. And there is a moment early in the Gospel of John where John the Baptist is standing around by the Jordan River with a couple of his disciples, and a stranger walks by. See that guy? John says, that's the Lamb of God. So naturally, the disciples are curious and go after the stranger to try to see what it's all about. And after a bit, Jesus, you all knew that it was Jesus, right? Turns around and says to them, what are you looking for? Good question. Rabbi, they say, where are you staying? And Jesus, who is homeless and isn't staying anywhere, says to them, come and see. Where are you staying? Or to pick up a key theme from the Gospel of John, where are you abiding? Who's your family? What's your profession? Who are your people? Where do you belong? By the end of the gospel, Jesus will turn that question about staying and belonging into an invitation into ever-deepening relationship and a new kind of community. Abide with me, he says, and I in you. Of course, that deeper invitation is not yet apparent to them. To get closer to that mystery of affection and belonging and acceptance, they need to travel with Jesus. They need to learn by being with him and with each other. Well, I did go to St. Paul's on a Monday. And to my surprise, I did love it. It was all totally new, totally intense, overwhelming. I felt shy and utterly inadequate, but I loved it. I loved the realness of the people I met. I loved the raw honesty, the immediacy, the lack of pretense. I was moved by the faith of that St. Paul's community. And by the way, MANNA stands for Many Angels Needed Now and Always. A member of the community came up with that. I was moved by their way of being church together. I came back the next Monday, and every Monday for the next 2 years, and when I was good and transformed, I went back to Cambridge and founded the Friday Cafe. So, what have I learned in 5 years? I'm tempted to answer, come and see. I've learned so much from the people I've been serving among. It's hard to know where to begin, hard to know how to talk about the fabric of people's lives without objectifying them in the process. And unhoused people get so tired of being objectified. You know, those of us who are housed, we see people on the street. Maybe they look scruffy or shabby. They have bags full of possessions with them, and automatically some part of our brain ticks off homeless. Why is that person sleeping in a doorway, we wonder? Why aren't they in a shelter? Now, the person probably has some very good reasons. But most of us don't spend a lot of time wondering about that. In fact, it may not really occur to us that the man in that doorway is a person as humanly rich and complex as ourselves, capable of making choices, ones we might or might not agree with. Most of us don't really want to know, quite honestly. It makes us uncomfortable. It takes us out of our comfort zones. It's ironic in a way that those who have never been inside a big city shelter to see what it's like, and from what I hear, crowded, scary, dirty, dehumanizing, often more like a jail than a shelter. Those of us who have never been inside are often the most truly sheltered, the ones with the luxury of not knowing what life is like on the other side of the homeless divide. Teacher, where are you staying? Come and see. Almost everything I've learned since I began this ministry, I have learned from the homeless community by listening, by asking lots of questions which people very patiently answer. Some of the hardships of homelessness are easy to imagine, but most we never see. Like the reality that when you're homeless, you're probably getting robbed pretty regularly. Mostly when you're sleeping. You literally have no safe place to store your things. Like what it's like to look homeless every moment of every day because you have your stuff with you all the time. Like the constant presence of drugs, alcohol, and violence in your environment. The constant unsolicited scorn, or worse, the invisibility, the averted gaze. On the day you become homeless, you learn what it is to be despised. You wake up one day at the mercy of an unfair world where rules are selectively, arbitrarily enforced, and there is no one to come to your defense. When you raise a ruckus, they label you a troublemaker and deny you services. You enter a maze of systems and agencies and administrators, a world of lost paperwork, jaded social service providers, and rules that seemed designed to defeat you. Strangers yell at you. They tell you you are lazy, that you just want a handout. Get a job, they say. But how? How when I have no address from which to apply for jobs? When I'm chronically sleep deprived? When I have no place to shower? When my only set of half-decent clothes was stolen last week while I was sleeping along with my backpack? When I have nowhere to store my things so I don't show up to the interview looking visibly homeless? When no employer will give me a second chance because of my criminal record? When my day consists of crisscrossing the city on foot to stand in line at the Social Security office, make my probation appointment, make my medical appointment, wait in line at St. Francis House for my mail or some lunch or the chance to do laundry? You sit too long and you're told to leave. You don't have spending money and you're told to leave. You appear homeless and you're told to leave. When I became homeless, one man told me, I immediately entered another world. I had no idea how people were treated, like you're less than human. Heartbreakingly, that treatment often comes from the folks who are supposed to be helping you. Shelter staff, social service agents, hospitals, the police. Every winter night, Pine Street Inn's 400 beds are full. Every night, the 400-bed, brand new Southampton Street shelter is full. The staff are undertrained and undersupervised. Many are just there for the paycheck. The shelters are supposed to help people get off the street, but there aren't resources to go around, not by a long shot. Pine Street Inn director Lindia Downey told radio station WBUR last January that winter demand had been up more than 20% in 2 years, and that her guests had been getting older and sicker. We've left the people with the fewest resources and the least ability to deal with it. We've left them to their own devices on the streets, and in some cases in shelter, Downey says. We've got it backwards. We should be giving those people maximum support and trying to get them stable. Across the street, across the state, men and women are staying longer in shelters, becoming what's known as chronically homeless. Longer-term guests are using shelters as permanent housing because there aren't enough permanent housing spots in which to place people. There's a real housing crisis going on in Boston, as we probably have all heard. All of that is hard to see when you're walking by someone on the sidewalk. And it's also hard to see or maybe imagine how that person might have gotten where they are. Everyone thinks of mental illness or addiction when they think of homelessness, but there are so many factors that can contribute to someone being on the street. A background of severe poverty, a history of childhood neglect or abuse, combat trauma, the lasting effects of a traumatic brain injury, a devastating loss like a death or a divorce. Very, very often, someone got out of jail only to find every door closed to them. Every story is different, every story is complex, but despite the prevailing public perception, never once in 5 years have I met someone who was just lazy or just looking for a handout, and I have met hundreds and hundreds of people. But you know what else is hard to see when you're just walking by someone on the sidewalk? The beauty of that person's life. The diversity of the homeless community, all the rich life histories, the amazing variety of gifts and knowledge and experience, the strength, the resilience, people's willingness to talk honestly about their lives, the way people care for each other on the street, the way they look out for each other, the fact that they are a community full of love and gossiping and feuding and forgiving. Everyone knows everyone by name. The deep faith. I'm biased, of course, but I do believe that the kind of work I do and that many of us are doing in the city of Boston or Greater Boston, that the kind of work I do, which is creating space for community, for encounter and listening, that kind of work is important. I'm not a social worker, and I'm not able to get the people who come to my programs what they need the most, which is housing. Nevertheless, I've become persuaded that my work matters. I believe that there is a healing that happens in community which cannot happen any other way. It comes through belonging, being part of the human family together. It comes through respect and dignity and being listened to and being seen, not with judgment, but with acceptance and love. We all hunger for those things, and we all have the power to offer them to each other. And the best part of it is that it's a two-way street. My volunteers often tell me that the encounters they have at the Friday Cafe have changed their lives. How? It's hard to explain. The best advice I can give you is come and see. And I brought some flyers. There are several faith-based programs in Boston and Cambridge where volunteers can connect with the homeless community, hang out, share a meal, and I'll leave a few of those flyers here for anyone who's interested. And that's about it. Thank you so much for listening.
I just got a chance to hear somebody who teaches at Suffolk and with a colleague wrote a book about about 70 women, and I wondered if you know about the book. I want other people to know about it. Her name is Susan Sered, S-E-R-E-D, and the book is called Can't Catch a Break. So it covers in depth the life over 5 years of women who have been incarcerated and then how up and down their lives were. She explained.
Yeah.
And she included in her talk. She was talking at a Unitarian church, a group of us who have been learning about criminal justice issues from various people. So she spoke about what she thought was the possibility that churches could offer a lot to such women. And the fact that they were spiritual or cultural capital, there's a term, that these persons lacked often because they didn't know how to explain why they were so miserable.
Right.
And they were often led to believe and came to believe that it was their fault in various guises over their period of interaction with various systems.
Yeah.
So I know there's one church in Newton that is opening their doors. Anyway, she said that it's a hard row and that people have to be prepared for the fact you may think somebody's really great the first time you meet her, or it was her in her case, and then 3 weeks later the person comes in having relapsed into some kind of addiction, not looking good, not smelling good, not whatever.
Right.
And that people often then will reject.
Yeah, that's quite true.
What your comments would be.
I think that's right. I mean, I think, that, again, that phrase, abide with me, my work is really about abiding regardless of how people are doing that day, regardless of where they are in their trajectory or what's going on or what has maybe caused somebody to have a relapse or to be having a bad day. So I and other ministers like me, we have a kind of a mantra, which is that we are not there to rescue or to fix people. We do try to offer resources if we have them. Whatever we have, we put out, we offer. I do a resource booklet that I obsessively update, and so on. But the bottom line is we're there to be with people, to be present to people, and to be open to being transformed by that. And often it may take quite some time before the dividends of that really begin to pay off. And there are so many forces that are trying to keep people down. But my job is to try to be as steadfast as I know how to be. Yeah.
You mentioned that primary needs are good housing, presumably addiction assistance, and so forth.
Yeah.
Has there ever been any attempt to form a union of the homeless so that they can put forward their demands of government to start filling some of these needs?
There have been, I think, there is a group right now called the Boston Homeless Solidarity Committee. What my experience is that it's very, very hard to stay organized when your time and energy is being taken up just trying to survive from day to day. It's really hard, to have that be another thing in your calendar that you're supposed to. People often just don't have the energy, or necessarily the confidence or the. So, but there is a homeless solidarity committee, and it has had some impact. And there are other groups that are trying to work on the activist side, but I'm not sure whether there's currently a union. I'm not aware of one in the Boston area.
There used to be a national coalition for the homeless. Is that still?
There is something called the National Coalition for the Homeless. Yeah, there is that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. One, does your group, or do you know any groups of church people, ministers, along with their congregations, that working with the people who are in charge of our cities, the legislatures, the people who are supposed to give services to homeless people? Because I used to go to a democracy meeting out in Cambridge.
The Democracy Center?
Yeah, and everything was okay until rent control was taken away.
Rent control.
In each area, not just Cambridge.
Right.
In each city. And so many wonderful people alive and making a difference became homeless because they would tell us as they were coming to meetings that it was really something that they were now on the street.
Right.
I think the main problem for most homeless people is they can't pay their high rents, regardless of whatever else is going on with them.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
I think that churches need to deal with that. And I see church people and ministers going by people on the street with their belongings on the street in the snow and the wind, and they don't say, come in, sleep here. And I hold them responsible for that.
Yeah.
They're the ones saying, I'm a Christian.
Yeah. Fair enough. Although often, most churches that I know are doing something, a little tiny something, a little piece of the puzzle, offering a meal or being part of a program or contributing money, or I do see churches doing actually a surprising amount, quite a lot, often unseen. But in answer to your first point about churches partnering or trying to have an influence on government, that does go on. Actually, the Boston Warm Day Center began because a loose coalition of faith people had gotten together and were actually trying to lobby the Walsh administration like crazy to say, we can't just be thinking long-term about building a new shelter. We have to be thinking about the needs of the 400 people who are on the street right now because the Long Island Bridge closed. And we had a very sweet postcard writing campaign in which members of the homeless community wrote postcards saying, help me, help me, help me, help me, help me, and stuff like that. And the Walsh administration got mad, and they felt criticized, and they felt, anyway, they kind of closed the doors on us, and that's why we ended up opening Boston Warm, because we felt desperate. We said, we are Christians, we have to do something. What can we do? And somebody said, we need to open a warm center, and somebody else said, well, how do you do that? And then everybody looked at me because I had just opened one. I had just started the Friday Cafe. And I had an operating plan, and I was like, well, opening a second warm center was no part of my plan, but that's what ended up happening. And Boston Warm has taken on a beautiful life of its own. I've just concluded my ministry there in a state of total exhaustion, but it has a life of its own, and it will continue. The Walsh administration has come around, and they are sorry, and they are regretful, and they realize that they didn't react the right way. They realized that we were not being jerks, but making reasonable requests. And the Boston Warm Coalition has had a meeting with Sheila Dillon, the housing czar, who knows her way around the affordable housing circuit. She's been doing this work for many, many years, and I think she's good. And they've committed money, and so I mean, I guess the hopeful thing is lots of people are doing a lot. The unhopeful thing is the challenges are absolutely enormous. Landlords and real estate people have a lot of clout, power. They have the real estate and the money, and eking out a little bit of that real estate for people of low income or no income is extremely difficult. The challenges are enormous, and many landlords don't want to rent to people who have a history of homelessness or incarceration. So it's an upward battle, but there are a lot of good people who are engaged in these issues.
I keep hearing that rents are going up in Boston in general,
Yeah,
quite a bit.
yeah.
And I'm wondering if you...
So for example, a lot of homeless people would just as soon not receive benefits. They would just as soon not be on the public housing list. They would just as soon work and pay their own rent. But what I'm hearing is that a single room in a not very good neighborhood starts at $800 a month. And you can work full-time when you're homeless and not be able to buy yourself a place to live. It's really, really tough. And that's why this issue of creating more housing is so critical. And research, by the way, I'm sure all of you have heard this, but study after study after study has shown that if you simply house chronically homeless people, no questions asked. You don't say, first you have to be sober. You don't say, first you have to have your mental illnesses all, nicely in check, or whatever it is. First you have to have your life all tidy. And then once you've earned it, we'll give you housing. If you just house people, no question asked, the state will save a ton of money on social services, on shelters, on emergency room visits, on police and the criminal justice system and all of that stuff. House people, give people proper support, and you will end up saving a huge amount of money. Like, I don't know. Utah has done this, by the way. Utah, of all places, has done this. And with about a 90-something% success rate. It works. The housing first approach actually works. But we need the political will. We need to stop saying that people don't deserve housing or they haven't earned it or you screwed up your life, that's your problem. We need to take a completely different approach.
What do you do with the 10% taxpayers put into housing and they walk away from it and they won't pay their $30 a month? I've been homeless since '98.
Yeah.
That's a big problem. Some don't want to be housed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, people are complicated. People are really complicated. They come into whatever their situation with a very complex history, sometimes involving almost unimaginable trauma. And so they behave in complicated ways. I actually behave in complicated ways. I'm a bit of a mystery to myself. And so it would be unfair of me to expect that somebody else would necessarily be rational in the way that I expect, in the way that I define that. There are going to be problems. People have trouble fitting into systems. They have trouble following the rules that are set forth. And that's true of everybody, not just unhoused people. We're complicated. Yeah.
Have you been seeing many children in your ministries?
My ministry is focused on what's called, what I guess is called unaccompanied adults. That means adults who don't have dependent children. There are, I'm sure, there are lots of people doing ministry specifically for families. And I did do some guided meditation work at a homeless a hotel in my area that was for families. So I did see some families there. I did a weekly meditation group for a little while and got a chance to see that. but it's not my area. I'm really focused on unaccompanied adults. Oh, you know what? I'm going to call on Nancy because she hasn't spoken yet. Go ahead, Nancy.
I wanted to compliment Kate on the calm atmosphere that you have at the shelter.
At the Friday Cafe,
it's a
right?
large room. You're very kind and calm with people. You set limits. You handle situations as they develop. But the fact that you personally are calm and relaxed in what people are allowed to do there, and that you have well-trained volunteers, a whole flock of well-trained volunteers. It's very calm and relaxing, and the only turmoil there is whatever turmoil you individually bring to the shelter. And Kate takes time to talk to people, and hopefully some of that turmoil dissipates. And even dogs are welcome there, as long as the dogs are very quiet.
We only allow 3 barks, and after that there's a reprimand, right? 3 barks, and there is a because some people are afraid of dogs, so we're trying to make the Friday Cafe a space where everyone can feel safe and can feel comfortable as best we can. Not perfect at all. But
Carla's dog was very quiet. Mine wasn't so quiet. But thank you for your work.
Thank you, Nancy.
And thank you for all that food. There's a whole side of the room is just one big table of everything from soup to chicken to salads, bread.
We're like a thrift shop for donated food. We try to pick up fresh food surplus and provide it on the day. So. Uh-oh. I think Randy has his hand up. See how I know everybody in Boston?
How many places in the Boston metro area can a homeless person who has had a hard night get a nap?
Well, Boston Warm is one of those places. So any day that you're at Boston Warm, you can lie down. We used to have cots at Boston Warm. We discovered that was a little more bandwidth than we could support, so now it's just a place on the floor where you can curl up. Friday Cafe, we have, we're down to 2 air mattresses. One of our air mattresses spraying a leak, but on space on the stage as well. The women's lunch place has beds.
Where is Boston Warm?
Boston Warm it's most months of the year. Boston Warm is at Emmanuel Church on Newbury Street. Right now, it's right down the street. So for the summer months, Thursdays from 9 to 2, Boston Warm is in the basement of Old South Church. One day in the summer. Sorry?
9 to 2 at night?
No, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Yeah, no. Right, so those are places that actually set aside space for napping. There may be others. I'm not very familiar. Most people don't. Most programs you're not allowed to lie down. And that's a big problem because whether you're inside at night or outside at night, most people, as I mentioned in my talk, have not had a good night's sleep for so many different reasons. It's so hard to catch a few on, a really good sleep. And so people are just chronically sleep deprived.
Very nice presentation, Kate. I have a couple of thoughts and questions. The question is, when I first became aware of the homelessness in Cambridge, it seemed like there were other public resources from the city, like there were outreach counselors or social workers who helped people, sometimes even in public places like Obopan or somewhere. And there was a day center called the Bread and Jams that had apparently a long history in the city. And I know that doesn't exist anymore, but I'm wondering, I know the cafe, have you had any outreach or networking with some of those agencies? Like, are you aware if there's an outreach social worker? Have they even visited the cafe? I know there was some of you may have read about a big bathroom issue where one church that had been keeping their public restroom open couldn't really sustain that any longer. And so I think the city and the faith community and other organizations rallied together to create a kind of outdoor toilet that would be available to anybody. And because obviously if a person is on the streets, they would need to have access to that. And sometimes even if you go to Panera Care or a public restaurant, the bathroom is locked unless you have a receipt.
Right. And Panera is gone, by the way.
Oh,
And so is
Square,
Panera is gone, and so is Au Bon Pain. This is kind of a huge disaster for the Harvard Square homeless community.
So that's the first part of the question. Then the second part of the question is, have you, if you could summarize some of the things you and the team have learned since you opened Friday Cafe about, hosting this event, and not in terms of learn about the culture, but just the
Like
sort
the
of
logistics of it? Or,
the day-to-day logistics of it. If there's anything nuts and bolts you can share, like by trial and error, or things that you've added since it began, or things that you had that you took away, that people might be interested in that too. Sorry to be so long.
Actually, one reason that I have concluded my ministry at Boston Warm is just that I felt spread so thin that I haven't been able to really focus on the lay of the land in Cambridge and to get to know some of those service providers. I've had some connections, and people. Healthcare for the homeless in Cambridge has dropped by Friday Cafe, just as at Boston Warm we have connections with Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, which is a wonderful organization. And we had a visit from somebody from the Cambridge Needle Exchange teaching us how to use Narcan. Hi, Shanti. I do really try to make connections. I really do believe in trying to be related and connected to people. And I did attend one session of a charrette last year on homelessness, in which experts got together and struggled with the issues, talked about what the issues were. So I'm trying to get more plugged in. In answer to what have we learned by doing the Friday Cafe, the answer is pretty much everything. I started off with an operating plan and about 15 guests, and at our peak we grew to 216 guests on one Friday in April. And so I've had to learn a lot about food and food rescue, about how to try to get donations together, toiletries and secondhand clothing, resources, etc. We've really just learned as we went along, and as the Friday Cafe has rapidly grown this year, we've rapidly tried to respond in order to be as present to people's reality as we can. That's basically what we do, is to try to figure out how to be agile and how to respond. And we figured out that if you just put stuff out, people will take it, and so stuff just disappears. You've got to be as welcoming as you can while being, Jesus says, wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So, yeah.
More of a comment. In my work, I sometimes encounter people at risk for eviction.
Yeah.
And always I advise people go to housing court.
Yeah. Yeah.
In other words, if you get an eviction notice, don't just leave, go to housing court.
Yeah.
And where you can sometimes mediate some kind of agreement and at least buy time and put off the inevitable and occasionally get help with back rent. But as an observation, I believe housing court in Boston used to be 1 day a week, and now it's becoming 2 and 3 days a week. And it is common for there to be 300 people in housing court on any given day.
That's right. And something like 30,000 on the list for public housing.
Is prolonged homelessness a prescription for slow, agonizing, premature death?
Yes. The longer you're out on the streets, the harder it is to get off the streets. That's just a fact. Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's hard. It's a very hard life. It's very hard on the body. Really, really hard on the body. And the spirit.
I have a question, a comment, but I wanted to mention, I came in late, sorry, I missed a little bit of your talk, but I'm glad you came. There's a P-TEX strap, there was a, who's? Okay. All right. Yeah. My name is Dick Crowley. I'm a longtime member of Community Church on the board here and program committee, so forth, but I wanted to thank you for coming. I've also had a background in working with homeless since from 1970s up until recently. Off and on, sometimes you just kind of back away from the type of involvement. But that was in Ohio for 10 years, 12 years Ohio, and then in Waltham area primarily. And I'm aware of some of the programs in Boston. But I think
on the way, yep.
One reason I mentioned that is, and my involvement with the church here is I'm on the board too, and we'll be in program committee. So hopefully we're small. We don't have a lot of people, membership, and
right.
Organizational people with the church, but hopefully that can be one of our focuses as we move forward with the homeless community, because obviously we're in the middle.
You're kind of at ground zero here in Copley Square.
Yeah, there have been times, I think, in the last 10 years or so where we talked about having some type of food program or some specific thing, but it's a tough thing to kind of organize when you don't have a lot of people.
Yes, it is.
But I just wanted to thank you for coming, but also mention that we'll try, I'm glad you came, and we'll try and keep it an issue, I think, as far as having other speakers come in and talk about it, but also maybe possibly focus, but also possibly get a small committee of people helping or working on that issue here.
Thank you.
Well, through us, through the church.
Thank you. It's a rapidly growing problem, so, yeah. Hey, yes?
Yeah, it sounds from what you've been saying that the progress is mostly going to come from the advocates for the homeless. So the advocates for the homeless need to be supported, obviously.
Yeah.
And the broader the support and the broader the issue is put into, public consciousness to support this issue and to help with, political demands is really important. And it just occurred to me, so many other issues get broadened on the internet and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts along those lines.
I do think the homeless advocacy organizations have an internet presence. This is not yet my area of expertise. I've sort of been plunged into the deep end with just trying to kind of do day-to-day programs and meeting needs day-to-day, and have not been, I've not found that I can sort of devote energy to that, but I know that there are people who are very knowledgeable and working very, very hard, and hopefully taking advantage of social media and all of that. Yeah.
I asked a question before, but I guess, okay. So I wondered, I'm not traditionally theologically anything, and many people here aren't. When this person talked about cultural, when this person, Susan Surratt, said that she thought that there was cultural competence, cultural capital that people who might be able to share.
Yeah.
I wondered whether you have thoughts about what philosophical ideas or theories or notions that homeless people who have, or this group that I just read about in the book, who've had very miserable lives, are unhealthy, and are likely to continue to do fairly badly, could use to uplift their spirits. The giving in an egalitarian way that you're doing, and the giving seems to me very substantially important and much better than the kind of giving that's kind of makes people feel that they're some kind of category of inferior being.
Right.
But
or being
what
punished.
kind of philosophical notions do we have to help us survive ups and downs that maybe you know more about than I do?
Yeah, tough question. I find that people often, as human beings, we want to make sense of our situation. And if your situation is heartbreaking and feels terribly unfair, people try to make sense of that as best they can. And often it's, why is God doing this to me? And theologically, I'm not one of those who believes that suffering is visited upon us by a God who is in control of events. That's not actually how I understand the way God works in the world. but neither is it right to sort of pull away somebody's understanding of of just trying to make sense of a situation that doesn't make sense. That feels terribly random. So I guess my approach is usually to remind them of the other side of their relationship with God, which is that they are beautiful and beloved and have value and have something to offer, and that they can find support in community. That it's not. I usually remind people it's not so good to be alone. If you can, try to be in community, because that's a source of strength. And being alone is terribly, terribly hard. Lots of people who end up homeless do tend to be loners, often, because of a history of struggle or trauma. So the loner thing is what we're trying to overcome a little bit with our approach, because it feels like the whole universe is against you sometimes. And this is a way to say, well, actually, we're all in this together, and other people are all, and you can help that person over there who's struggling. Maybe they're having a bad day today.
Kate, I just wanted to thank you again and follow up on what Dick was saying about our own geographical circumstances here, the irony of being on a high fashion, high retail street.
Right.
In the front and in the back is an alleyway where there's people shooting up and people sleeping under dumpsters.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You just open that door and you can see it.
Those
and
people.
It's just such a strange and truthful paradox, not only about this location but about capitalism.
Oh yeah,
and,
absolutely.
But the way I wanted to follow up on what Dick said is that we are in this location, and maybe it's just the beginning of a conversation with the rest of the faith community that's involved in this issue, and how we can be useful given our strained kind of human resources, not only congregation but staff as well.
Right.
So it's something to just keep talking about.
There is something really important that every single person in this room can do, and that is to have a relationship with the people that you pass on the sidewalk. To stop and say, hey, how's it going today? Hey, I'm Kate. And then you get to learn people's names, and you just have a relationship, and no matter what condition that they find themselves in for that day, just being able to stop and face people face to face as human beings makes a big difference. It really does make a big difference, and yeah. Everybody can do that.
I just want to add to what Dean said. It's not just out the back.
Yeah.
I've seen 3 people dead on that square over there.
Yeah, we're in the middle of an opioid epidemic, and there's some really, really, really nasty stuff being sold on the street, and it's bad out there.
There are a few more questions. I just want to add, many of us have connections with prison services, and as people come out now, there are very few resources.
Right.
And do you know of any new ones? The specific thought that I have is about Corey backgrounds. That's the state level of reporting a person's past history, and makes it nearly impossible to find work, to find housing.
Oh yeah, clearly mass incarceration is these issues go hand in glove together. Income inequality, mass incarceration, the housing shortage, all of these are just completely intertwined issues. There are some employers who are willing to take a chance on somebody with a bad Corey, but there are many, many who aren't, and that also goes for landlords as well. So people can feel very, very defeated. I think a lot of the people that I see who look able-bodied who are sitting, who are coming to these centers every day, the drop-in centers, who seem able-bodied, I think they're just kind of defeated by the fact that nobody will give them a chance. So criminal justice reform, absolutely. You all are part of GBIO. My church is part of GBIO. They're taking this on. They're trying to get rid of the mandatory sentencing stuff. This stuff is critical, absolutely critical, and to decriminalize, to get the law out of the drug problem. It's just a mess. It's a mess, and the wrong people are being locked up and clogging up the criminal justice system. So absolutely, yeah. So.
I just make one comment. I think it's timely that I was watching the news recently, and they had a news report about somewhere in the country. I think it's the Midwest or something. Maybe it's Minnesota, but where they're actually advocating that people not contribute to panhandlers, and then instead put it in a fund or something like that. But I think it's a tough issue. They've also pointed out it's a constitutional right to ask for help, even in those types of circumstances. Yeah. And I had a friend, a minister friend years ago, who said it kind of impressed me. He said, "You never know. You give $1 sometimes, and that might be the dollar that kind of turns that person's life around." So I just want to make that comment. There's always been a movement to try and discourage panhandling and stuff like that, but it's something. It's a sensitive issue, and it's something I think also relates to what you're saying about, instead of being offended by it, try and understand what that person's circumstances is, and if you can, at least say hello. And
at least say hello.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Panhandling, I mean, it's difficult. Does some panhandling money go for drugs and alcohol? Sure, absolutely. I buy drugs and alcohol, right? I buy Tylenol and I buy alcohol, and some of my money goes for that, which could probably be spent in better ways. And honestly, trying to get through a day on the street without drugs and alcohol for a lot of people is just more than they can. I mean, it's just brutal out there. But a lot of times it goes for food or having a cell phone, which you have to have if you're trying to get a job, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's not up to me to judge where the money is going. And honestly, when people, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but when people talk about, well, we don't want to see those people, my feeling is you need to see those people. You need to see, homelessness needs to be visible. This is our problem, not their problem. This is our problem as a society. We need to see it. We have to be reminded on a daily basis that there are 7,000 people in the Boston area without homes. That's something we need to know. We need to know that. So that's where my little rant comes in about that.